Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to see everybody at the EUROSTUDENT Talks webinar. I am Marlene. I'm greeting you from Tallinn, Estonia, as usually, and I will be moderating this event here today. And first of all, as you know, we are today talking about transnational student mobility. And for doing that, I'm very happy to have here Eva Maria Vogel. So hello, Eva. And also, I hope that one of Eva's co-authors, Michael, will be joining us soon, at least he promised to do that. But to start with, I will introduce Eva briefly. Eva has been a researcher in DZHW, the German Center for Higher Education Research and Science Studies, since 2013. And after completing her doctorate at the Department of Political and Administrative Sciences at the University of Constance, and before joining DZHW, Eva worked at the Collaborative Research Center at the University of Bremen. Eva has been a member of the EUROSTUDENT team as well between 2017 and 2019. In 2019, she led a project on higher education governance and its comparability between the German Länder. Since January 2020, as part of her postdoctoral position, she has conducted research on the conceptualization and comparative measurement of academic freedom in the European context and on socioeconomic conditions of students in Europe. In addition, applying quantitative research analysis, she has been conducting research on determinants of transnational student mobility for many years already. So this is about Eva, and as I said, we should also have here Michael Winchell, who is been co-authoring many publications with Eva, some of which will be published later this year. And Michael is from the University of Bremen. He is a professor of sociology, and he is leading a working group focusing on migration and urban research. So those are our speakers today, and I'm very happy to have them here. But to start with the content now, as we are talking about transnational student mobility today, I think we should start with some background information, as there might be listeners who are not very familiar with this topic and with the research in this field. So first of all, maybe Eva, you can describe what does previous and current research show in the field of transnational student mobility?
Well, first of all, good morning or afternoon or whatever time it is at your place. First of all, I'd like to explain why we use the term transnational instead of international, because usually student mobility, cross-country student mobility is termed as international student mobility. This is kind of a thing because I'm a political scientist, and for us international is something between governments. This is why we decided to refer to the term transnational. I don't know if people like it. It's kind of why we use this. Yeah, it's kind of a hard question to start. What's the main findings? It's because in time of this pandemic, we are kind of in the it's kind of a turning point for international student mobility or transnational student mobility, as it has been come to a halt, or almost to a halt, for a few months, and now we need to see what the effects will be. But the work we will present are kind of the global patterns that we can identify up until before pre-pandemic patterns, and our main research questions are always like, what determines study destinations attractiveness? This is a country's attractiveness as a study destination. So we don't focus on individual factors like what's the personality or the ability of the individual students being transnationally mobile, but what factors act as a push or pull factors for transnational student mobility. So we're on the macro level, and with the recent research, we're on the macro level, because we kind of went up from the EHEA to EHEA and OECD, and now we look at a global sample. And as Michael has joined us, let me, I'd like to give Michael a few minutes to introduce himself or to say hello to you, and then I will start with the screen sharing and get started. One more point, if there's anything you don't understand or something, just interrupt, because it's boring to follow presentations where you kind of lost in the middle and have to catch up later. But yeah. Okay, Michael, hello.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Eva. Yeah, Michael Vincio, my name. I'm sociologist at the University of Bremen. Our research institute is called Sozium as part of University of Bremen, and I collaborate with Eva for a couple of years now. And yeah, my research focuses on migration, urban structure, mobility, social inequality, education, social network analysis. Yeah, that's it from my side.
Very nice to meet you, Michael, and thanks for being here.
We had a problem with the time because it's for us it's 11 a.m. and in Estonia it's already 12 p.m. But I'm happy we figured it all out. Okay, so shall I start with the screen sharing? And
yes, the floor is definitely yours.
Okay, if you don't mind, Michael, I would give the floor to you for the first slide on the grand patterns, because I will have a lot of talking in the following, so it's not too boring to always listen to me. Okay, this is actually something that most of you know. It's about, we also looked at the destination countries in the EUROSTUDENT sample to prepare for this webinar. So as I said, our research mostly focused on the attractiveness of countries as study destinations. So we looked at EUROSTUDENT data. Where do students go, or how does it compare? We can come back to this later, but I guess you're all pretty much aware of this because it was in the synopsis. And we now want to present you the kind of the bigger picture, or the global network of student mobility. And yes, Michael, I would ask, as I said, ask you to talk a little bit more about it, because I will have a lot of talking later on as well.
Okay, well, yeah, it looks quite colorful. There's not that much to talk about it because it's just a description, just a visualization. But so as Eva already told, we are focused on the macro level, not on individuals. This is aggregate data, and countries are linked to each other by a migration flow, student mobility flow, actually. The point is, between countries, there's almost, at least always, some mobility. So you have to define when there is a crucial level of mobility. And our approach was that each country sends to other countries students, and a particular number of students. And if in one particular diet, if there's 30% mobility above the average a country sends to other countries, then it is a tie. And by doing so, you have a kind of, this is a considerable amount of mobility. And this is why, yeah, this is a process by which countries are tied to each other. And as you can visualize this as a network, and then you can also cluster. This is the result of Louvain clustering algorithm. You can cluster a kind of cliques or dense subnetworks within this overall network. And yes, you have centralized groups. This is the blue one, Great Britain, Norway, European countries, basically. And this means that there's a lot of student exchange within this cluster. And it's also, the blue one is more or less in the middle of the overall network. This is a result of the Spring Embedder algorithm, which means that these countries are not only tied towards each other, for instance, Finland, Denmark, Poland, and so on in Norway, but they are also tied to many other countries in the world. And this is why they are in the middle. Yeah, that's it already. But I think we'll come back to this later, because what we did in our research then is not just to visualize this network, but also to explain, to statistically explain why we observe this particular network out of a huge sample of other possible networks. This is a kind of regression modeling, and we can then model why we observe, for instance, a tie between two countries who have a similar level of GDP per capita, or who have a similar culture or institutional fragility, and so on and so on. So this is just visualizing it. But the aim of our research is, of course, explaining it, modeling the network. Okay, that's it from my side.
Okay. This is the perfect, perfectly comes to our next slide, where we kind of summarize what we did, what we or others already did, to explain the patterns we see. Let me shortly summarize it, and then come to, so what did we do, or what does our research add to this, or to what we already know. And there's a misspelling on the slide, as you saw. The most important, should it mean, but also most unbalanced exchange relationships exist between bordering countries. Having this said, this finding is based on a European sample, or a European and OECD sample, on something that we did in 2013 and 2014. And we found out that the most unbalanced patterns of transnational student mobilities are between bordering countries, especially in Europe. We could name French students studying in Belgium, German students studying in Hungary or Austria. These are the strongest exchange patterns, but the most unidirectional challenges. So where students from one country go to a specific other country. We and a lot of other that we can't all cite found out that countries with high GDP per capita have greater chances of hosting students. English-speaking countries can attract the highest proportion of international students, and that there's a strong, robust, positive effect of cultural similarity, and we measured it by religion and language. This is of particular importance for transnational student exchange. Although we have seen the network and that global student mobility, that quite a large amount of students go, or we perceive that they go long distances, for example, from India to the US or whatever, but the largest part of all students rather stay in the region. There's also a lot of research recently on regional hubs. So this cultural similarity and also the geographical similarity are still very dominant, even in this globalized days. We did recently, in our last paper that was just published 2 weeks ago, also formal colonial relations to see if they impact on transnational student mobility patterns, and we found that they are crucial for the intensity and direction of exchange, and these effects have been quite strong. As you can see here, this is kind of the network we've seen before that Michael described, but the countries sorted by their colonial or post-colonial ties. And there you can see, I don't want to describe this too much, but we kind of tested this also to control for language and cultural similarities due to colonialism, so to check for multicoloniality in our model. But at least it surprised how strong the effects still are. If you see the green cluster, This is Great Britain and the former colonies. You can see a Spain cluster. This is the violet cluster. You can see the Portuguese cluster. This is the dark blue dots in the green cluster. You see a Russian cluster with countries that formerly belonged to the Soviet Union. You can see this Iceland-Denmark cluster that's very closely connected. Turkey, which reaches back to the times of the Ottoman Empire, and so on and so on, and France with its former colonies. So we see that these effects, these are data from 2017, are still very strong today with respect to student mobility. So basically, a lot of students from the former colonies still choose their previous colonizing countries as study destination. Michael, if you want to add something, just yell, because otherwise I just keep on talking and showing pictures. Okay, this is something that is work in progress, which will not come. We've been working on this for quite a while, but it's kind of a side project for my colleague Fine Cordova and me, which we don't really find time to manage, but manage to find time for. But when she's back from parental leave, we will actually get into this. And this is we were wondering ourselves, do gender student mobility flows vary by country of origins, or formulated otherwise, does the gender of the mobile students, the origin cross-checked by gender, matter in the choice of destination? Of study destinations? And there are many studies that cite gender roles as one of the main explanations for the overrepresentation of women in transnational student mobility. Also recall the EUROSTUDENT findings that we see in the synopsis over and over again, where we say there's an overrepresentation of women in transnational student mobility for a European sample. This is argumenting with, oh, female students perform better at school, they're more likely to choose academic school careers. The gender-specific choice of subjects at school and at universities, men are generally more concerned about entering later market and more worried about losing time. And also, this is more from the a lot of case study research on Turkish and Indian women being transnationally mobile, that women might use transnational mobility as a means to counter anticipated discrimination in their countries. But there's a problem with all this research, because gender roles are not persistent or across countries. They vary across countries for one, and for the other, most of these studies are based on Western sample. So students coming, or mobile female students that Western female students becoming mobile. So we try to find out, does this matter where the students come from, if they go abroad and where they go abroad. And here you see the two related to EUROSTUDENT. This is the student mobility experience by type of study related activity abroad. Marlene took this out of the EUROSTUDENT database, and you can see that in the EUROSTUDENT sample, overall, there's more student mobility by female students than for male students. What my colleague Fine Cordova and I did, we plotted this transnational student mobility by gender and gender equality index. So on the left y-axis, you see the share of male and female. Actually, you don't see a lot because it's all countries in the world, and that's why it's so small. But this is not to hinge on every single data point, but to show the pattern, because we think we found a kind of a pattern. So on the y-axis, you see the share of female or male transnationally mobile students coming into Germany. This is data for Germany, because it's hard to have data on the gender of students, especially working comparatively. And you can see the higher the gender inequality index, thus the higher the gender inequality of an origin country of a transnationally mobile student is, the lower is the share of female students. Unfortunately, we have to say studying in Germany. This might be because of Germany, or this might be because there's a pattern between gender inequality in countries of origin and student mobility. So this is kind of an open question, and also question of data availability. So we had this, we grouped this, what we've seen for individual countries, also for regions. And in the European Union, you can see if the students come from the European Union, you can see there's an overrepresentation of female students. The same could be said for Australia and Oceania, and for the rest of the even Union for the Americas. But if you look at Asia and Africa, the pattern reverses. So you can see that the share of female students decreases as the gender inequality index values of the origin country increase. So we see this pattern, but we have to kind of make sense of it. If it's, I mean, the discussions we have in EUROSTUDENT as well. Well, is it gender? Is it subject? Is it whatever? Is it origin? Is it destination country? Because we just have data for Germany. So this is the question is, why do we see what we see? And well, this leads back to a lot of questions we also have in EUROSTUDENT.
Yeah, I'm definitely very thankful for this very intriguing overview. But before we move on, I'm just checking if someone from our listeners has any comments or questions, then please, you're welcome. But if not, then to move on, what I wanted to ask about is that, yeah, you talked about this previous research and what you have been doing lately, but what about your own research focus exactly at this moment?
Well, our research focus has, as we will now lift the secret of the strange title of this webinar. Our research focus is on political institutional factors for the attractiveness of a country as study destination, because most research focuses either on the students on the micro level, thus on the students, or on factors like GDP or other macro factors. But what we want to our point is that the institutional surroundings, the institutional setting of the overall country of the country hosting international students has an impact on the choice of study destination. And we also check this for perceived quality of study destinations, and our basically, or what we believe is our contribution to this field of research is looking at the institutional side, or the impact of the institutional side on student mobility patterns. I know, Michael, if you want to add something, did I forget something?
Not forget, but maybe just some more words. So of course, if you look at migration studies, you very often find these economic effects. So GDP per capita is an attractor, and a low GDP is a push factor, and so on, which is actually true, and what we also find in our data. But what we have learned from institutional economics, so transaction cost theory, for instance, Williamson, North, and so on, they argue that economic productivity, so GDP per capita, economic performance, is definitely also a consequence of the institutional setting in a country, which reduces transaction costs. But there's even more about it. How predictable is behavior of other persons? How predictable? This is what law is doing, making behavior predictable somehow. And how efficiently does this institutional surrounding work? This is the question. And economic performance is one outcome of this institutional surrounding, as we have learned from transaction cost economics. The problem is, of course, that due to this line of argumentation, if this is true, and I actually believe that it is at least worth investigating, then you have quite considerable multi-collinearity. Institutional, where we have, for instance, data on fragile institutions, as you can see on the slide here, so institutional fragility, fragile state index. We have Shanghai ranking, so the reputation of the university. We have democracy, and we have academic freedom, and so on. These are institutional factors, but this is all strongly correlated with GDP per capita. This is the reason. The reason is because the institutional surrounding is has a strong influence on all these characteristics. And what we're going to do now is to search for the underlying latent factors behind all these variables, which are strongly correlated, in order to reduce it to one basic dimension of institutions. Maybe it is a little clearer now what we are going to do. So we try to combine all these institutional measurements.
Okay, so we, as I said, we move with our research from Europe to the Europe and OECD to global, and now we kind of try to dig more deeper into the foundations. Where do institutions come from, and how does this interaction between institutions and the psychology of people living in that country also determine the interaction with other countries and people, or just can this be a form of attraction or disattraction for a study destination? Here Michael already talked about it. This is just a descriptive, just mapping of data on the map of countries. It's just an easy way to display values, although it's kind of some countries are larger than others, which has no impact basically on our term, but it's just a way how to show data for all countries. I mean, you know this problem from your student, to kind of display data without using up too much space and get an idea of the distribution. So we choose this geographic or the map to show the data of fragility of state institutions. So as we can see, there is a large variance between countries. The lighter the color, the more stable are the general institutional setting of a country, and the red or the darker the color, the more fragile is the institutional setting of the country. So, and this fragility also means it's not just fragility, but also homicide rates and stuff like it's fragility and also personal safety of the inhabitants of this country and people coming to this country. So now, after half an hour, we finally come to what's the acronym and the title of this webinar. So why are mobile students weird? And if Michael wants to, he can start, because I know this is kind of he's very much into this topic. And as he said, this is kind of the foundation of institution and also the psychology of weird people in our hemisphere. So Michael, why are we so weird, and why do we expect transnationally mobile students to be weird as well?
Yeah, good question. So I didn't choose a title, by the way, but this is definitely nevertheless important, because what we have also found in our data are effects of cultural proximity with respect to language group, of course, but also with religion. And we have also found effects of institutional fragility, fragile state index, as I already told. And it turns out this might be very important, the institutional issue. Institutions, so bureaucratic institutions and formal law, as you know, maybe from sociology, as Max Weber analyzed a century ago, has a kind of cultural foundation. In Max Weber's theory, it is about Protestant sects and so on. It starts with culture, religion and culture, and the end is a bureaucratic organization of the Occidental states and so on, and also the culture, rationality, and so on. What already Max Weber told us, this is the peculiar path, a very special path of this area. This is not in a way normal in world cultures. And there's a very similar argument quite recently by Joseph Henrik. He's anthropologist at Harvard University. Very interesting book. Maybe also there will be, I'm quite sure there will be a debate on this book in the next 1 or 2 years, called The Weirdest People in the World. And he makes a similar argument. And the point is, so studying at universities, yeah, how should I say it? It's something special. So if also, for instance, also in European countries, in particular in Germany, we had this educational expansion, so that the state invested a lot in expanding the higher education system. And this means that children are usually higher educated than their parents. And this means also that these children are quite different in many, many respects, also values, norms, also that psychology, because they were part of the institution, of the education institutions for that many years, yeah, getting higher education and higher tertiary education and so on. And and this is now, I come to the point now, if globally young adults make their way through these educational institutions, of course, this affects their psychology, their values, their aspirations. Academics are usually more liberal and so on. And this means that, and this is one argument motivating the analysis of academic freedom. Of course, if you grow up in a country which is not democratic, which is authoritarian, where strong family ties are still very important. But if you go through this institution to change your mind, and this is why it might become attractive to study in other countries, yeah, with more formalized institutions. And well, I'm not sure if this argument in the end is true or if this is the explanation, but we find these effects. Yeah, we find effects that for academics, academic freedom is very, yeah, is a strong predictor of global student mobility. Yeah, and actually this has to do with the cultural development of these countries. And if you take a closer look at Joseph Henrik's work, he says, well, what happened in industrialized Western countries is that the psychology has changed. We grew up in different environments, and this had a strong impact on even our cognition. Yeah, this means we are psychology. Yeah, we are Western, educated, industrialized, resourceful, democratic, and this is very attractive for most academics, actually, or for most young adults who study and in order to become academics. Yeah, this is the argument. I'm not sure if this is clear now, but you can talk for hours on this approach, because this is very fundamental. How did societies change towards modernization, yeah, towards industrialization and so on? So this is a very, very huge topic, actually. Okay, you want to add something, Eva?
No, I just, kind of to summarize, so weird is basically Western, educated, industrialized, resourceful, and democratic. But weird just also emphasize that it's not kind of the standard, that it's something that developed because of the impact of certain institutions like Catholic and Protestant Church. So it's because in a lot of literature you read like, oh, this is a very normative stance, like, oh, this has to be like this or that. The way why we think it everything is democratic and things have to work in a certain manner is because we are weird, because that's our psychology, that's the way we were brought up. But that on a global level, this is not kind of the standard, and it hasn't been the standard for human interaction for a long time. And one point which is especially important was this is like, okay, this is a big topic, what does it have to do with higher education, student mobility? It's very important because at some point, weird people like us decided to send their children to school, to state institutions, and have them educated by non-kin strangers, which was not the normal case. Usually, children were educated at home by their kin and not by some stranger that has been educated in a public institution. So this is kind of part of the constitution of our weird culture and our orientation towards education, and especially towards higher education. And this is for us to say, okay, this if people from students from other countries have been socialized into this weird culture due to their educational background, due to passing secondary education, they might be more inclined to study, or might be more willing to study in countries where this weird culture is dominant and where they have this institutional setting for the academic career. This is kind of, please interrupt if you have something to add, but otherwise I would say this is the leads us to our new or additional research focus on academic freedom and democratic rule. And as this has to do with, I won't repeat everything that's on the slide because that's kind of on the origin of academic freedom and the Humboldt principles. The point is that this academic freedom, and this has a lot to do with democratic rule, and has a lot to do with this weird culture and institutional settings. And the main point is that academic self-governance and self-administration plays a key role for academic freedom, to have the other freedoms, this principle of freedom of learning and teaching, of teaching and research, and the unity of science and scholarship. To have these principles work, you need an institutional setting, and this is the academic self-governance and self-administration, which protects the universities and higher education institutions from external influences or political or religious censorship, or other entities controlling universities economically. It might also be that economic interests come into the way of this research interests. So why is this important, or why do we think this also plays a role for international student mobility? This has to do with also that we assume that students will look for a more liberal environment for their higher education, and that the academic freedom of a country mirrors also general freedoms, that this might be attractive for students to study somewhere where they can be, of course, successful academically, but also in a way they have a more liberal learning and living environment. So especially in these times, why should we, I mean, we have so many problems going on around the world, why should we bother about academic freedom at all? I will show you some, I will show you on the next slide a figure on that. Basically, you can say academic freedom mirrors a country's general freedoms. And so attack on academic freedom also hinders society's development towards becoming more authoritarian, and where this can lead is what we are experiencing at the moment. So looking at this is, as I said, I developed a thing for mapping data on maps with our, these are not the, as we've seen before, the Fragile State Index. Now it's the Academic Freedom Index mapped on countries. The Academic Freedom index basically measures these components of academic freedom, freedom of learning and teaching, self-governance and so on, but also campus security, and if students are allowed to express your opinion on campus freely. These are part of the academic freedom index. And as we can see, overall, if we look at the overall sample and overall statistics, descriptive statistics like mean, median, variance, minimum, maximum, there hasn't been much change during the last 20 years. But if we look at individual countries, we do see really large changes, especially looking, for instance, because it's the large at Russia, which had quite high values on the academic freedom index in 1997, and has very low value, or had very low values in 2017. And I might add that academic freedom values is based on examining laws, legislation, higher education legislation of the countries, and also general legislation on free speech and so on, but also on a survey of experts. So people working in the higher education system, and rating how the conditions have changed. So what we can see is that although there is overall large stability in the sample, there are a few countries where we can see that academic freedom has really gone down in the last 20 years. And yeah, maybe Michael, you want to you can also see some patterns in our research. We have a favor for some ways of depicting data. Michael, maybe you want to explain what we did with the academic freedom and the global student mobility data, and how we grouped it in this network, because this is kind of this is also a network analytic study. We believe that these patterns are relational, and thus you have to investigate them with relational measures, which are social network analytical measures.
Yeah, again, you see a network and edges. So edges are these ties between nodes, these are the countries, and these edges are again student mobility patterns. And the nodes are grouped according to region, so Europe, South America, and so on. And the size of the nodes are scores in the academic freedom index. So the larger the node, the more academic freedom you have in a country. And this is quite heterogeneous, except for Europe. This is basically a region, even including Russia. Russia has the lowest academic freedom value in this yellow group. The yellow group are European countries, but overall you have quite high academic freedom. And this is not surprising that European countries are basically in the middle of this graph. Again, this is the Spring Embedder algorithm. And the Spring Embedder algorithm pulls nodes together if they constitute a clique, and if this yellow group is in the middle, then they are linked to each other, but also to many countries surrounding this center of this graph. And of course, the USA is North Middle American country is right in the middle here. Yeah, but you have some areas, for instance, the brown one, Central West Asia, where academic freedom is very, very low. Yeah, not in all countries. Israel is also part of this area, but you have a high academic freedom. So this is not at random. And again, this is just a visualization. You see there's a lot of mobility among and to and between these yellow countries and countries with high academic freedom. But at the periphery, you have also many countries where academic freedom is low. But again, you have to model it. You have to control for further factors, and then you can estimate the effect of academic freedom on global student mobility. And this is what we did and we still do. And what I can say is there are effects, as we expect. So the higher the academic freedom, the higher the in degree. So the more ties get countries from other countries. So the more relevant mobility a country gets. And the higher the academic freedom, the lower the out degree. So academic freedom keeps students within the countries controlling for many other factors. But again, of course, there's a considerable level of multiculinarity. Again, this is correlated with GDP per capita, correlated with Shanghai index reputation, and that's it. So we have to control it, and there is multiculinarity, but overall, again, this affects, academic freedom affects global student mobility, as we expected.
Okay. I think it's time for the discussion, because maybe we're very interested what you think about this weird strand of research. And also I thought, or Marlene told me as well, that there's also a lot of events, like current events, that could relate to our research. So yes, thank you for your attention, and we're very much looking forward to your feedback on our weird research issues, I'd say.
Yes, thanks Eva and Michael for the presentation. And yes, about this academic freedom, like me commenting, as there are no questions in the chat yet, but I really encourage everyone to comment and ask questions. But when thinking about this academic freedom and current situation in the world, what I was thinking of is that I think it's often believed that this student mobility can act as a channel for democratic and liberal values to spread between countries, because students go to one country, we hope that to a more democratic country, and then they come back to their homeland with those democratic and liberal values. But and there has been some discussions lately that is it right or not when Western universities say that we don't take any more students from Russia or from Belarus as a sanction. And there have been like discussions that maybe it's not right, because otherwise those people can't get this democratic education and so on. But when looking at the research, what does this say in light of these discussions and the situation?
Well, that's interesting, because in Germany we have a different approach, or the German exchange, German academic exchange Dienst, what's that in English, office. They encourage researchers from Russia and students from Russia and to study in Germany, and they have programs. So this is basically what you said. Is it right to cut off all connections, and also to people who are kind of say do not agree and are looking for different settings, also for different academic settings? But it's also, on the other hand, there have been a lot of cooperations between Russian universities and European universities. And I guess, as you're all well aware of, there has been this banning of Russian universities from the EUA, since they kind of were very affirmative towards the war on Ukraine. So it's difficult, and this is something I might really like to discuss. Is this what do we do if we know that academic freedom, and if we know that student mobility can be a channel of kind of diffusing democratic first of all, does it hold? Has it been that way? We should ask ourselves. And so how can we work on that this channel and this still works and will not break and due to current events, and that the contacts are not completely interrupted. So it will take us again decades to build up relationships with other scientific communities outside of the European Union cosmos.
Yes,
there was quite an interesting contribution in the chat, yeah, and just referring to it, I also think this is pure speculation. I don't have data, and but we should investigate it. The point is, if people from non-democratic countries study in high-ranking universities, they are very well educated. If they go back to their home country, they get a very good position. So they benefit from their education, but then they also benefit from their system. It is both. Maybe they are more liberal, and then they become political opponents against the regime. But maybe they become collaborators because they benefit a lot. They earn a lot of money, have high power, and so on. What could be very interesting, a very interesting next step in our research could be to test the following hypothesis. Maybe there is an effect of global student mobility on overall migration with a particular time lag. It could be that graduates go back to their country, to their home country, and then notice, well, it's very non-democratic, very authoritarian, and now they are more sensitive towards this non-democratic situation. And then they say, okay, I am now, I experienced a liberal environment, I will go back to this liberal environment. And it could be that global student mobility triggers migration. Yeah, and there is data on it, but there is no study actually, as I know, as far at least as I know. And so we have, it's again pure speculation, but there are different individuals. Some benefit in their home country and they make a career and become part of the authoritarian system in the end. Some others become involved in social movements, and some others then go back to the country in which they graduated because they appreciate the liberal environment.
Yes, thanks a lot, Michael. We're definitely looking forward for your further research and new publications on intriguing topics. Are there any more comments or questions from our listeners? Or maybe Emma wants to add something as the last words?
I'd like to ask about national experiences. I mean, how do we, I guess we're all mostly from EHEA countries. How is it handled in the countries? Are contacts to Russia completely cut off, or is there kind of a balanced approach, or how are the reactions? And also, what about students? I mean, there are a lot of mobile Russian students. How are they dealt with?
I know that Allan, who commented here before, is representing Estonian Student Union. So maybe you, Allan, want to join in and share your thoughts?
Okay, maybe quickly, but mostly the Estonian universities one by one have said by an official decision that they will not take Russian or Belarusian students as of next academic year into the country. And it seems that this is due to the strong advice given by the security services, that it is not known which kind of people will come here. And there was very acute debate about this in Estonia. But basically, this has already been done, and it's unlikely to be reversed. Considering the fact of Russian students who are already in Estonia, it's a tricky position because we already know of cases when they are studying in Estonia, but their monetary income has collapsed because the ruble is worthless. And what has specifically happened is not known to me, but people somehow manage. And also I know in Tartu University, the university has decided to extend certain like study periods of Russian students, so they would not go back to Russia because there is an acute threat that they might be drafted to the army there. So there are many like nuances to be discussed. And also I heard from a case in Tallinn Technical University that the Russian parents try to get the student back to Russia because they heard from the Russian news that it's very unsafe to stay in Europe. So there are several layers to this, but mostly it's very like security-oriented decisions.
Thank you, Alan. Very, very interesting nuances actually that you brought out, like how to manage the whole situation and this admission is also in the context of this info war and everything. Any other comments from other countries? Seems that not. Anyway, we are so well in time. I think that we have had very interesting discussions, and I'm very, very grateful for Eva and Michael that you came and shared your research and your findings. This is very cool always that we have researchers coming to EUROSTUDENT Talks and talking about what they are doing in the field of higher education research. So thanks a lot to both of you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I'm as a EUROSTUDENT veteran, I'm always happy to come back and to see what your student is doing, and I hope it's also interesting for your student to see what we are doing. I mean, your student is so much more than mobility, but yeah, and I hope there will be events or opportunities to meet the EUROSTUDENT family in person at some point in the near future again.
Yes, thanks a lot, really. Appreciate it highly that you come and share your thoughts. And thanks to Michael as well.
Yeah, thanks for having us here. Thanks.
You're part of the EUROSTUDENT family now.
Indeed, and every next publication should be part of EUROSTUDENT Talks in the future. But yeah, thanks for our listeners as well. And please keep updated through EUROSTUDENT Twitter, for example, because we're always advertising our new events there as well. So yeah, thank you everyone.